who should the Detroit Pistons draft if they were to fall from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 to 4 to 5? I think we all know who they're going to draft if they get number 1, but if they fall, who should they draft? We're going to talk about all those different scenarios in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We're joined by friend of the podcast, Hal. We bring Hal on a lot throughout the offseason before draft times. Hal is great with the draft. He was on a lot last year. You can obviously find him on Twitter at Hal Bridius and also his Busted Header podcast. So in today's episode, we're going to be going through... We're doing a little bit like a little surprise with Hal. He doesn't know what the order is going to be before we go into each segment. I'm going to be going to Tankathon. I'm going to click sim before each segment, and we're going to play out the scenario on each segment from number 1 to number 5, since that's the farthest the Pistons can fall, to figure out what we think the order would go and who the Pistons would take in that scenario. I know Hal's ready for this. I trust what Hal's his scouting is. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hal, I hope it doesn't screw you over immediately with number 5. That would be the toughest. So let's go ahead and click Sim Lottery. Okay, they do give us 5 in this one. Okay. So, Hal, this is the order that we're dealing with in this one. We got, and you might want to write this down unless you can remember it yourself. We got number 1, Indiana jumps all the way to 1. Number 2, we got jumping all the way up from 13, Minnesota, and that pick now goes to Utah. So number 2, Utah. Number 3, Houston. Number 4, Washington. And number 5, Detroit. So Hal, based on all the scouting that you've done thus far of all these prospects, how do you think this draft order would play out for the Pistons before they get their pick at number 5?
All right, so Wemby's going first, right? I don't see any reason Wemby's not going first. Utah is in need of pretty much any star power they can get, right? I would think Scoot Henderson goes to Utah, right? You got your prototypical superstar point guard prospect. He's got to land there. So then it's a question, does Houston want Brandon Miller? Is the overlap with Jabari Smith too high? That's a funky landing spot for Houston, because the next special guy on the board is Almond Thompson, probably. And he's like a 6'6" freak athlete, but he's also kind of a point guard. I think that's probably where I would go for Houston, just because they do need somebody to kind of take that primary playmaking responsibility. But that's a tough spot. I think Washington goes for Brandon Miller then, if that's the case. And so that leaves Detroit probably in the Jairus Walker territory is what I would say.
All right.
What does that make you feel?
So I think I feel all right with that. I mean, I obviously would like a higher pick, but I feel all right with that. The question I want to go from this is, so we've talked about the draft a little bit more, obviously, as the season started to come to an end. I think we've talked about the draft and possible prospects on at least 3 podcasts the last 2 weeks, I think. And obviously we'll talk about it a lot more, and opinions will change before the draft. Like, we still got a long time to go. The question I have for you is, it felt like, and I could be wrong, I'll let you explain, but it felt like that you almost feel like that Miller, this was my read, you feel like Miller is almost assuredly going to number 3 unless a wonky fit. Is that what you believe? Or, I mean, is that what you believe? And my question to that is, do you feel like Miller actually is worthy of that? Or do you think he's being overhyped a little bit? Because the few of the guests I've had recently, they feel like Brandon Miller might be getting overhyped a little bit more over the likes of players they think should be ahead of him. And the two names that I've heard people say maybe should be ahead of him are both the Thompson twins. How do you feel about that debate with Brandon Miller? Is he being overhyped, or is he actually worthy of this hype that he's getting?
Okay, so complex question for me. I think Brandon Miller's really good. Wings that can score from mid range and three, and I think he'll get better going to the rim. That was the thing he was kind of rocky on all year. I really think he's um, a good defender. He plays positional defense really well. I don't think he's ever going to be like the big stopper for a team. He's just kind of got a weird frame. He's got kind of a weird torso, and I think it's going to hurt him from being the true elite defender. But he was pretty smart on that end for Bama. So like I think he's a really good prospect. There's a couple of drafts he might have contended for number one recently. I don't know that he ever would have gotten there, but like he is good. I do think that the Thompson twins are guys that have higher upsides. They are freak athletes. Amon is maybe the best passer in this class. Scoot is the better, like Chris Paul style, cerebral, checks all the boxes as he goes through a play and like sets things up. But when you're just talking about a guy who can kind of touch the paint and make a crazy pass, Amon is special in that regard. The problem with the Twins that would give me a lot of hesitancy is they are very raw. Amon doesn't shoot at all, really. Alsar is pretty rocky still. I am personally a guy that thinks Amon is a top 3 contender. Alsar is probably like 7 to 10. I think he is a little lower on the ability to kind of have that prime role. But they're so raw that you really have to trust your coaches. You have to trust your situation because you are going to invest, 2 years in these guys plus before they ever really give you, I think, that, those winning plays on a regular basis. Both of them are like freak athletes and great defenders, but they're also guys for whom team defense is like not a thing yet. They're just not good there. They've never really had to be good there. So that kind of stuff is going to linger, I think, and it's going to take a brave coaching staff, I think, in a brave front office to take either one of them over Brandon Miller, just because Miller was so successful all year, and he does things that are so kind of obvious NBA skills. Even though I personally think that Amon might be the higher like end talent.
All right, so let's go ahead and get to the pick you think the Pistons would have made in this scenario at number 5, Jairus Walker. What does Jairus Walker bring? Why do you have him going at 5, and what do you think he could do for the Pistons? Not just like his first year, but moving forward. What makes him the pick there?
You just got to kind of imagine what happens if Isaiah Stewart is way more athletic, and just kind of a smoother, more fluid athlete all the way around. He brings you that similar defensive versatility. He can guard 5s, he can guard 4s, he can guard 3s, and he might be able to do some switching on 1s and 2s. Certainly, I don't think you're ever going to like match. It's not like Ben Simmons, right? You're not going to like put him on a 1 intentionally, but he can switch up and down. He's really cerebral as a defender. Big physical body that can like rebound and do all the dirty work. And then he really brings an intelligence offensively that I think can scale up, maybe not to like a true prime offensive role, but if you're the Pistons, you're not looking, I think, for that anymore as like your number one factor for drafting guy, right? You have Cade, you've got Ivy, you land 5. These guys probably aren't going to be the best player on your team in 10 years anymore. That's not really what you're looking at 5. So you're looking at a guy that can really, really help your team, within that first contract, right? Can you get playoff contributions from a player in year 3, year 4 of that rookie deal, and get real value? That's something the Pistons really could benefit from. And I just think Jairus is an intelligent offensive player, a really talented defensive player. There's not a lot of guys on the board after you clear 4 that are just guaranteed to like be stars. And so you're really looking for kind of connective contributions, I think, at that point. And I really do I think Jairus could be a starting forward in the league for 15 years.
All right, well, the last question I have for you, and make it a quick answer because we do want to get to the next pre-roll or the next draft lottery roll. If the Pistons, after this season, were to fall to 5, and Jairus Walker is the reward after this season. Do you feel happy? Do you feel disappointed? What are your feelings?
It would suck. I mean, and I love Jairus as a prospect, but it would suck, no question. You have the worst. Are we still on pace for the worst season in team history? I don't even want to think about it, but you have that. I will say, I would feel a whole lot worse if we did the like fake compete thing and we were at 28 wins and we end up with the ninth pick in this draft and we never tried to get Wemby. Like if I'm going to suffer through a season like this and through multiple seasons like this, I would at least rather have known that like we gave ourselves the best shot. The NBA has fixed or nerfed tanking, which I don't really think is healthy for the league actually, but they've gone and done that and they've put you in a position where this can happen. But I mean, it's the only way you can get these guys. And in a draft like Wemby, at least you had to try. You did what you could.
All right, fair enough. I can respect it. Coming up, we'll re-roll the Tankathon one more time, or we're going to do it two more times, but the next segment we'll do it for the second time, see where the Pistons end up, 3-4-2, and talk about how the lottery or the draft would play out at that point. But first, before we get into any of that, I've got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easiest way to buy your tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theaters near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. The Pistons have 2 more home games. By the time you guys listen to this, they'll be playing tonight, and then they got another game at home on Wednesday. Those are the final 2 home games of the season. Go check out Gametime. You could possibly get some flash deals, some last-minute tickets to the last 2 home games for the Detroit Pistons. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find your tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit your 110% of the difference. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Hal, let's go ahead and get into the next Tankathon roll here. And I do want to say this. We're recording this on the 3rd of April here. So obviously there's plenty of time to the draft. People's opinions can change. More scouting can happen. Things can happen. So this is just the opinions as of this date. I'm sure things may change or could possibly change by the time draft actually comes around. All right, Hal, let's go ahead and sim this one. Hopefully we don't have a team jump from 20 to 1 again. They got the Pistons at 5 again, so we're not doing that one. We're gonna skip that. All right, 3 straight Pistons at 5. Okay, this is a good one, I guess. I think I know what your answers are gonna be, but this is a good one to play out. So, San Antonio is number 1, Detroit is number 2, Indiana is number 3, Utah is number 4, and Houston is number 5. Now, obviously, this is a Pistons podcast. We're going to be talking about the Pistons pick and why they take that pick. But after we do that, I'd like to see how Hal thinks the rest of the 5 would play out after that too, the top 5. So we'll do that. So I'm going to assume Hal, San Antonio obviously takes Wembenyama. At 2, this is where the heated discussion has been happening in the Pistons community for the last few months, once it was very apparent the Pistons were going to end up with top 2 odds after this season, how this season's went. There's been a ton of fighting over what would happen if the Pistons got number 2. So I'll let you take it from here. Who do you think the Pistons would take it to? Who do you think it's even close? I know some people don't think it's even close. Some people think it is. Some people think it actually went from close to a different answer because before the season it was Scoot. So where do you fall in that scale? How close is it? How much competition is it at number 2?
So I'm very much still Team Scoot. I think I've been doing draft stuff for 9 or 10 years now. Um, and he's easily the best point guard prospect I've scouted. Um, I just don't think you turn that down. I think the Miller conversation is interesting, right? Because it's a positional conflict. You already have multiple guards on the roster. Even if you're willing to get rid of Killian, which I know most people are willing to just write that off, especially if you get Scoot, you're still trying to figure out how to balance the Scoot, Ivy, Cade, you know, the minutes, the roles, the touches. I get the Brandon Miller appeal in that sense. It's a better fit for the team as it is right now. I think the biggest question I have to ask is, do you think Brandon Miller is going to have value equal to that of Scoot 5 years from now? Is he gonna if is what you think Brandon Miller can be going to be, as valuable as a trade asset 5 years from now, 4 years from now? If you need to make a swing to go get a different player to help round out your team, how valuable is he? I don't know that he's going to carry the same value as Scoot. I think Scoot's a better player personally, and I'm willing to just ride with that because I'm pretty sure that if 3 years from now we decide that, hey, all three of these guys are worth 30% usages, they're all this good, we can't sustain this, I'll trade whichever one's worse, right? Or whichever one is the least good fit with the team, whichever one is the worst fit in the locker room. However you decide it, that dude's going to give you back a Donovan Mitchell level haul, right? If they're all three are good, you're going to get absolutely loaded in the trade, and I just don't see a downside to that. Especially when Cade is 6'6", and Ivy is 6'4". Both are long. Ivy's a terrible defender right now, but should be getting better at that. So I think you can even play these three together for short stretches. I think for at least 2 years into their careers, you can manage those minutes easier. Right? It's only until they all have the kind of star equity to demand minutes that you're going to have any conflict at all. And again, I think you can easily swing a trade for the best possible fit at that point. If one of them sucks, then you got the cover for him, and you don't have to worry about it because you got the other guy. And if they're all good, you're gonna have one of the best trade chips in the league to find the best possible fit. So I don't see a real downside.
So you seem to talk, and I agree with you about the trade aspect of this, but I feel like that's where you center the majority of your talking. So do you believe? So are you of not the belief that they could all play together and they could fit together? Do you think that if the Pistons were to get 2, they draft Scoot, could that be something that's their big 3 for 7 years? That's the team, that's actually their squad? Or do you think that even if you take Scoot at 2, you're eventually going to end up trading one of them, but the trade value that you'd have, like you mentioned, is worth having that kind of outcome happen?
I think you're going to end up trading somebody eventually, but I think that's going to be true no matter who you pick in the next couple drafts. I think it's just a fact of the salary cap and a fact of kind of life in the NBA. These cores rarely stay together forever. And if they do, it costs you $150 million, right? It's just kind of part of the deal. So I don't think it's going to kill you right now. I think you can definitely play them together. I think you can close with them together. Somebody's going to come off the bench for a short period of time. I just think that's okay. I don't think the risk there is going to kill you. And I do think that Scoot is a level of prospect above what Brandon Miller gives you. I think Miller's good, but there's kind of a level of playmaking value and stuff that really vaults you into stardom, and he doesn't have that for me. So I just think the value is just so much higher.
Now, I'm glad Hal mentioned this because the players and the association did just agree on a new CBA, and at some point in the next week or so, I'm going to talk about it. I'm not talking about it yet because I don't fully understand it, and I'd rather have an expert come on that's an expert with the CBA and all that kind of stuff come on and explain it to all of us. So stay tuned for that for the rest within the next week or so. I'm looking right now for someone to get on here. It'll eventually happen. I think that whatever happened within the CBA, I've seen a lot of people talk about how this changes things for a lot of teams and how, building can happen. So stay tuned for that. But Hal, I've said this before, and I'm this. We actually just talked about this before we recorded. I don't watch college basketball. I hate college basketball. I only wait to do any kind of scouting until the Pistons season's over. But based on the people I trust and based on the things I've read from guys who do a lot of draft stuff, Scoot sounds like to me the type of player that even if you question the fit, you can't let that kind of talent slip by you and you figure out everything else later. So that's where I'm at with it right now. Real quickly, though, I know we're running a little bit out of time with the second segment. So I want to get your answer on this, and then obviously I want to hear how you feel the top 5 would actually play out. But let's play devil's advocate on the other side of the argument. What's the argument for Miller over Scoot? You feel like that actually, if you think there even is one, what do you think is the argument for Miller over Scoot at that position? Or do you think there's even someone else that you think is more deserving of being the person that you'd consider it to than Brandon Miller?
I love Almond. The fit here for Almond Thompson would be really hard. I think he is talented enough that the right team could pick him at 2. I'm not even sure who that team is, but that's, if you've got the coaching staff that you're confident in, that could be it. I don't think they're really ready for that project. I don't think they can do it. So I think for Miller, it's almost the bogey effect, right? So this is a kid who comes in, he shoots, he does enough defensively that he becomes he's consistent, and he just gives your guards enough to work with that it helps Cade and Ivy grow into their best selves as players because they're playing with a good third option. I think that's the biggest sell for Brandon Miller for me, is that you're just getting a guy who's going to fit in and whose kind of lack of glaring holes is going to let everybody else kind of grow faster.
All right, so let's go ahead and finish this up before we get to the next draft lottery roll. So how do you think they would play out after that? So you got the Pistons taking Scoot at 2, then you got Indiana, Utah, and Houston. How do you think it plays out?
I think you're going to give Brandon Miller to Indiana. I don't see a positional conflict there big enough to worry about. So then it becomes Utah and Houston. I still would love to give Houston Amon. I think that makes a lot of sense, but I think he'd probably be the pick for Utah as well. So Houston becomes the real tricky one here. They have a bunch of guards. They need a true point guard desperately, I think. They've already got a bunch of Jairus Walker style forwards. So maybe Cam Whitmore is your pick here. Maybe Alsar Thompson is the pick. It'd be one of those two, whichever. Whether they think if they think they need shooting right away, I think you go Cam. Really athletic, 6'7". He's a little bit like Sadiq Bey if Sadiq Bey was just a nuclear athlete. Same limited playmaking issues, but pretty fun player. Or Alsar Thompson, who's kind of a cut and move freak athlete who could eventually be a little bit more of a playmaking upside than Cam Whitmore. So I think that's how that plays out.
All right, fair enough. Coming up, we're going to do our third roll of the draft lottery and see how that all plays out. But first, I got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, BetterHelp. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process, especially because we're all always growing and changing. Trust me, I wasn't the same guy I was 4 years ago, 3 years ago than I am today. We're all constantly growing and changing. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way that we do until we talk through things. BetterHelp connects you with licensed therapists who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are to who you want to become. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just to fill out a brief questionnaire to get started and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Again, you can just fill out a quick questionnaire. You get matched with the licensed therapist, and if you're not vibing with that therapist, you want to get a different one, it's as easy as a snap of a fingers just to switch therapists for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. For all of you guys watching on YouTube, you guys see the new setup. It's nice, I know. It's nice, I know. So just to let you guys behind the scenes a little bit, Hal cannot see me at all right now. He can't see anything. We spent like 10 to 15 minutes beforehand trying to get this thing to work. Camera would eventually work, and then I just freeze. So it was just, Hal was a soldier here and said, you know what? I can go into it without seeing you. I just need to hear you, and we can get it rocking. So you guys are getting a good setup, a good episode, but Hal, unfortunately, is being tortured with just a still shot of whatever I'm doing over there. I don't even know what it is, but he's being tortured over there with that. Anyways, though, let's go ahead and move on. I hope you guys do like the new setup. Let me know in the comments down below or over on Twitter at Kuka if you guys like this or enjoy this new setup that we have going here. Hal, let's go ahead and do the third and final role possibility for the Pistons. The next one, we got San Antonio at 1. Chicago jumps from where were they? 12? They jumped from 12 to 10. I just want to say this before we even keep going. When I do these tankathons, I've seen more teams jump like 12, 11 spots than I've seen the Pistons stay in the top 3. It's crazy. This is ridiculous. But Chicago jumps to 2, Detroit falls to 3, Houston to 4, and Charlotte to 5. So, Hal, I'm going to assume, obviously, Wemby number 1 to San Antonio. I'm going to assume you think scoot to Chicago at number 2. Now, I think this also is another really good discussion here because at 3, you can go Brandon Miller, or do you go a different prospect? Do you go Almond? Do you go a different Thompson, the other Thompson twin? Where do you go with this? How much of a discussion do you think happens at this spot? I feel like at number 1, it's very clear. I don't think it takes even more than 1 second to determine, obviously. 2, it could be a discussion. I'm wondering where the front office stays. I think the most discussion happens for the Pistons at 3, 4, and 5. I think that's where you'll see them have the most discussion and see them take the most time off the clock here. So where do you stand right here? Am I right with how you think the first 2 would go? And where do you think the Pistons should go at 3 in this position?
Yeah, I think you're right with the first 2. I think it's pretty easy. I think the pick for Detroit is almost obviously Brandon Miller. I just don't think they're ready to take on the Almond Thompson project. I think he's every bit the kind of usage person that Cade and Ivy are. So he presents the same issues that Scoot does, right? So it's getting a point guard in. And I think there are some teams where they have kind of a share first culture and a offense that maybe you can figure that out in. I just don't see Detroit as being creative enough to handle it right now. And again, I don't think they have the timeline that really fits. So I think it's got to be Brandon Miller. I don't see Alsar is not in it for me. So then it's like, you would have to be like really in on someone like Cam Whitmore, and just like really believe that he's a higher level playmaker than he showed in college to bring anybody else, I think, into the conversation. So I think for me it's Brandon Miller, but I also definitely think pretty much starting here, you gotta start thinking about like what is this pick worth in the trade market. Brandon Miller's a really good fit. The question is, can you get someone that's as good a fit who is maybe ready to contribute right now? And if like I said earlier, the sell for Brandon Miller is that he's kind of the tide that raises all boats as far as making sure the other guys are ready to play, and that they're developing healthily. Can you go get a like an OG Anunoby or somebody like that? Somebody who's similar but like a senior veteran ready to go now that kind of kickstarts you, because I think that would be the move if people are really interested in getting into the play-in and winning 36 games next year. That veteran presence might be the next step. So I think at this point you're starting to consider that every bit as much as the picks. But I think if you're making a pick as Brandon Miller, and I still think it's like an 80-20 decision to make the pick in the first place too.
All right, so I think it's interesting that you said about you had to start considering possibly trading the pick. And I think that just falls on, and we've talked about that on the podcast, and it's going to be interesting to see what Troy Weaver decides to do. It depends. Is next year really this, we have to take this next step into the playoffs? Like, is that really like what they're trying to do next year? Because I talked about this in the podcast all year. I hope after this season people see that just assuming a top pick gets added to your team does not mean that you'll get added wins. 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds do not come to the NBA contributing to wins. They can be good for an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, and you can see how they're going to be great in the future. But most of the time, 18, 19-year-olds do not come into the NBA ready to contribute to winning basketball. It just doesn't happen. They're too young. They're too raw. Usually they're awful on defense. Like, there's all kind, and they have a big learning curve. So it rarely happens. So I think that's a good discussion to have. A good argument that needs to be that we'll see probably play out if the Pistons were to fall to 3. I think in what Weaver decides to do, I think would be very telling. My question to you back is, I've had two or three other guests so far in the last 2 weeks talking about the draft and all these different possibilities. I have now gathered, I'm sure the listeners have, that they're much higher on Almond Thompson, I feel like, than you are right now. Do you feel like that's the case? Do you feel like you're not as high as other people are on Almond Thompson? Because I'll just say the two people I've spoken with so far think that he should go number 3, or they feel like he would seriously have to be in consideration for 3 because of how high his ceiling is and how much of a freak athlete he is. Where do you disagree with that? Why do you disagree with that? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's hard to be higher on Almond Thompson than I am. I freaking love Almond Thompson. I've been beating the Almond Thompson drum for 2 years now. I mean, he and his twin were both eligible, I think, last draft, and they chose to stay. And I would have snapped him up last draft in a hurry. The Almond Thompson thing is purely a fit thing. He's every bit the talent, and it's just I am super not confident that the Pistons are the team that can survive the 2-year plus process it's going to take to make him into a winning basketball player. He's very much not a Dwayne Casey player. The mistakes that we saw Jaden Ivey make, before the Paris game, right, when he was turning the ball over all the time and a lot of pass and crash stuff, that's the stuff you're going to get for a year with Almond. And you're just going to have to survive that. He's not a good shooter, so somebody's going to have to teach him how to shoot. There are just a lot of things that, like, somebody's going to have to be willing to live with this process. Dwayne Casey's in the last year of his contract, right? Going into next year, they're promising wins. I just don't think the Pistons are ready to handle that, and I'm not entirely sure that, like, as somebody who's watched a couple prospects here now, not get kind of built around the way I want, right? And not, we've seen it with Killian, and we've seen it with Cade last year, where it took so long to get a roll man. It's just little things about the way this team operates that, more so for Amond's sake than for the Pistons, I think it's a bad fit for him. Like if San Antonio were at 3, and it's just that's a team that's got this awesome culture of development and is kind of got an established coach and everything that you really trust, I think he's talented enough for me to be in contention for number 2.
All right, so I think that's something else that we'd have to dive in the future. But I love the fact that you brought up, like, fit with these prospects. I do think that matters. I obviously want to take best player available most of the time, but the fit, if you don't believe that you're in your training staff or in your developmental staff, your coaching staff, that would be a good fit for that prospect, then you could really derail their career for the first 3-4 years of the career. And that's how you end up with guys, I feel like, in like year 5, year 6, when they go to a new team, all of a sudden it's like, oh, how did this happen? Well, it's because you didn't develop them the right way. You didn't set them up the right way. So I think that's a very interesting take on it, and I think it 100% should be something that teams obviously take into account, but fans need to take into account as well when they look at these prospects.
I think it's always important to not talk about best player available and fit in a vacuum. Um, it's always you always want to take best player available over fit, but players are only going to be the best player when they're in situations where they can thrive. And you definitely have to consider that, if they're a bad fit for your team, you could be getting 80% of the player that they would have been somewhere else. And that I think is definitely worth consideration, especially when you're talking about something like Scoot and Brandon Miller there at 2. Like that is absolutely something that you have to be confident in, that you can work with either one.
All right. Well, the final question I have for you, and I've asked the same people every time I've had someone on to talk about the draft. I've asked the same question in the podcast. I'm gonna ask it to you, and don't shy away. See, Bryce, I had Bryce in the podcast. I had to absolutely squeeze this out of him. I had to get him to take a fly, like be risky here.
He's very take averse, Bryce.
Yeah, yes. So look. Outside the top 5 guys we've mentioned so far, obviously I've heard you talk a little bit about. We haven't talked about Wemby because Wemby's just like a given. Scoot, Brandon Miller, Almond Thompson. Outside of those guys, who is the diamond in the rough for you, if you have one yet, that maybe will be drafted mid first round, maybe even late first round, somewhere not in like the top 5, 6, whatever, potentially, that you think could be like the next. Not just like a role player, but like I feel like every draft there's always that 1, 2, 3 guys that end up falling to like in the mid-teens or the 20s and end up becoming stars, all-stars and stuff. We've seen Kawhi and Paul George, and Giannis. We've seen superstars fall to those picks. If you had to take your pick right now, I won't hold you to it all summer because it may change by then. I'll ask you again at that point. But as of right now, who is that prospect for you that you think, if you had to pick one, is the diamond in the rough that you could see in a few years become an all-star leader kind of stuff?
This is a fascinating question because this is not a draft that is like full of that kind of player, right? It's a draft full of like utility guys that do a lot of fun stuff, but kind of have like the one thing that isn't really in this draft is the guys who have offense and like playmaking to go with it, which is where that upside comes from, right? Playmaking is the thing that scales you up and up and up in usage and in role. So like the obvious name is a guy like Gigi Jackson because he's just the 6'10" power forward that's very athletic and like has some touch and it's just very raw, and he's the youngest player. I'm gonna go a slightly weirder route and say Leonard Miller, the G League forward. He's just kind of one of those weird 6'10", 215-pound guys who scored like crazy in Canada, joined the Ignite this year. Just a weird player, a really weird player. Was like a very offense heavy, had the ball in his hands all the time in high school, and he's had to like take a role next to Scoot. And he's become a pretty good defender. He's a terrible shooter, but he has incredible finishing touch. And he's just one of those guys where like if the shot comes around, it's going to click everything into place for this guy. And you're going to get a guy who is really versatile defensively all the way up the forward line, and who's got some ball handling and playmaking chops, who's a really good finisher. And really, it's just like that shot will make him fit into all sorts of lineups. And suddenly he could be, a guy who's giving you, 28 and 4 on a regular basis. And that's your fringe all-star kind of contribution.
All right, so everyone go write it down. Hal Bridius, the Leonard Miller. That's what we all need to go write down now. But all right, we'll wrap it up there. Hal, thank you for coming on the podcast, man. Despite the fact that
anytime
with some technical difficulties for you seeing what's going on over here, I appreciate you fighting through it and recording with us. Everyone, go follow Hal on Twitter at Hal Bridius. Great for the draft content that's going to be all this off season. So definitely go hit him up over there and follow him. Appreciate you guys making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button, my goodness, at the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And I just want to let you guys know. Killian just had a 20-7 game, and I didn't talk about it not even once on the podcast until just now. So I did that for all you haters out there. I didn't even mention it one time. So besides that, I'll see you guys later. Enjoy these final few games from the Pistons. Go hit up a game if you want, man. It's the last one till October. But until next podcast, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe. Go Pistons. And peace out.